What if the person who destroyed your life was someone you trusted every single day? January 7th, 1969. Winter in Cambridge, Massachusetts felt like ice cutting through your bones. James Humphrey climbed the narrow stairwell of 6 University Road. Each step creaked under his weight. The smell of mildew hung thick in the hallway. His breath came out in white clouds. Something felt terribly wrong. His girlfriend Jane had not answered her phone all morning. He called her 7 times, 7 desperate times, and got nothing but silence. She missed the most important exam of their Harvard doctoral program. The general examinations. Pass them and you continue toward your PhD. Fail them and you go home with nothing. Jane never missed anything important. Ever. James reached apartment 4B on the 4th floor. His hand touched the doorknob. It turned easily. Too easily. The door swung open by itself. The broken lock that Jane complained about for months. She begged the landlord to fix it. He never did. That broken lock was about to reveal a nightmare. Jane. His voice cracked through the silence. The place looked dim. Winter light struggled through the dirty windows. He could see her bed across the small studio. There was a shape beneath the blankets. Her fur coat spread across the top. But something felt completely wrong. The air itself felt heavy, like the room was holding a terrible secret. James' heart started pounding hard. He backed into the hallway. His hands shook as he knocked on the neighbor's door. Jill, something is wrong with Jane. Something is very wrong. Jill Mitchell followed him back inside. She was Jane's friend. Jane had played organ at Jill's wedding just months earlier. Jill moved toward the bed slowly. She reached for the fur coat with trembling fingers. She pulled it back. What she saw next would haunt her forever. Jill stumbled backward. Her hand flew to her mouth. Jane's nightgown was pulled over her head. Blood soaked the pillow. Her skull was crushed, bone fragments everywhere. And then there was something else nobody expected. A mysterious red powder covered everything. Her body, the sheets, the walls. Even the ceiling had this strange dust that looked like old rust. The brilliant 23-year-old archaeologist who just returned from excavating ancient ruins in Iran lay dead in her own bed, murdered while she slept. Jill ran to call the police. James stood frozen in the doorway. He could not move, could not look away. His mind refused to accept this reality. For 49 years, Jane Britton's murder would remain nothing but questions without answers. A young woman with a brilliant future who vanished from life one frozen winter night. Her family kept empty chairs at every gathering. A bedroom her parents could never bring themselves to change. A brother who would spend half his life wondering who took his sister. Who destroyed their family. What no one knew then was that her killer had been hiding in plain sight the whole time. Before we continue this shocking story, take a second to hit subscribe and like this video. Your support helps bring these forgotten stories to light. Now let's get into who Jane Britton really was and what actually happened that January night in 1969. To understand what was lost that terrible night, you need to know who Jane was. Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1969 was a city of 2 completely different worlds. Harvard and Radcliffe represented the peak of American academia. But Cambridge also pulsed with counterculture energy. The late 1960s brought massive social change. Drug culture exploded. A whole generation questioned everything. 6 University Road sat right in the middle of all this chaos. The building was old and falling apart. Roaches crawled everywhere. Paint peeled from the walls. There were no locks on the outside doors. Anyone could walk in from the street. The fire escape provided another easy way in or out. No one would see you. No one would stop you. The building had a dark history. Just 6 years earlier in 1963, a woman named Beverly Simons was murdered in the same building. Someone strangled her in her apartment. The Boston Strangler took credit for her death. Albert DeSalvo confessed to 13 murders across Boston. Beverly was one of them. Now 6 years later, another young woman lay dead in the same cursed building. Jane's apartment was on the 4th floor, a small studio. She shared the space with a turtle and a cat. Animal pictures she painted hung on the walls. She loved to paint. It relaxed her between the intensity of her studies. But who was Jane Britton before she became a murder victim? She was born May 17, 1945. Her father, J. Boyd Britton, worked as an administrator at Radcliffe College. Her mother, Ruth, was a medieval history scholar. Intelligence ran deep in Jane's blood. Jane grew up in Needham, a quiet Massachusetts suburb. She attended Dana Hall School, a private school in Wellesley. Jane was talented in ways that went beyond academics. She rode horses. She played piano and organ beautifully. She painted, but her true passion was archaeology. She attended Radcliffe as an undergraduate majoring in anthropology. Her academic excellence was extraordinary. Jane wrote her entire senior thesis in 1 week. Just 7 days. Most students take 6 months. She graduated magna cum laude in 1967. Those who knew her described Jane as dedicated, brilliant, social, but intensely focused. She was friendly with all kinds of people, even the odd people in Cambridge, the hangers-on, the counterculture crowd. Jane did not judge anyone. She was curious about people the way archaeologists are curious about ancient civilizations. Her special interest was Near Eastern archaeology, ancient Persia. She dreamed of making discoveries that would rewrite history books. In mid-1968, Jane got her chance. She joined an archaeological dig in southeastern Iran. The expedition was led by Professor C.C. Lamberg-Karlovsky and Stephen Williams. They were excavating a site called Tepe Yahya. She was finally living her dream, standing in the desert, brushing dust from artifacts untouched in thousands of years, holding pieces of history in her hands. She brought souvenirs home, small pieces of pottery, and a stone pointed at one end, about 4 by 6 inches. She kept it in her apartment. That stone would become very important to solving her murder. Jane returned to Cambridge in fall of 1968. She moved into her 4th-floor apartment at 6 University Road. The general examinations were coming soon. After passing those, she would begin her dissertation. She was saving money, planning to move to a better apartment in early 1969, one with locks that actually worked. She had a boyfriend named James Humphrey. He was also an anthropology doctoral student at Harvard. They studied together. They understood each other's passion completely. Her neighbors were Donald and Jill Mitchell. Jane had played organ at their wedding. They were friendly neighbors. Jane's final day started ordinarily. January 6, 1969, the first day back after holiday break. Jane had dinner with her anthropology classmates at a local restaurant. Everyone talked about the upcoming exams. Everyone felt nervous. Jane returned to her apartment to change clothes. Then she went ice skating on Cambridge Common with James. It was freezing, but Jane loved winter. They skated until their faces went numb. They stopped at a pub for beer to warm up. Then they returned to Jane's apartment around 10:30 at night. James stayed until 11:30. They talked about the exam, about their futures. Then James left. He had to sleep. The exam started at 9 in the morning. Jane was restless after he left. At 12:30 in the morning, she went down the hall to the Mitchells' apartment. They were still awake watching television. Jane had a glass of sherry with them. They talked about her cat, about the exams, just neighbors being neighborly. Jane returned to her apartment shortly after midnight. She locked her door, or tried to. The broken lock barely held. She changed into her nightgown. She climbed into bed exhausted. Her last thoughts were probably about the exam, about Near Eastern archaeology. She had no idea someone was climbing the fire escape outside her window at that exact moment. She had no idea she had minutes left to live. She had no idea her murder would become one of the most famous unsolved cases in Massachusetts history. The Cambridge police arrived within minutes of Jill Mitchell's frantic call. Massachusetts State Police joined them. The medical examiner came next. The 4th floor became chaos. Police officers everywhere. Crime scene investigators taking photographs. Neighbors watching in horror. James Humphrey sitting on the stairs with his head in his hands. The medical examiner examined Jane's body carefully. Blunt force trauma. Multiple lacerations to her head. Skull fractures. A bruise on her arm. Probably defensive. She raised her hand to protect herself. It had not been enough. The autopsy confirmed sexual assault. Time of death was approximately 2 in the morning, about 10 hours before James found her. The murder weapon was never found. The examiner believed it was a pointed object, something heavy, something that could crush a skull with repeated blows. Then one investigator noticed something strange. Jane's Iranian souvenir was missing. The pointed stone she brought back from the dig. It was gone, vanished. The theory formed quickly. The killer used Jane's own souvenir to murder her, then took it when they left. But the red powder, that captured everyone's attention. It was everywhere, scattered across Jane's body, on the floor, splattered on the walls, even on the ceiling. The powder looked like rust. fine like dust. Red ochre. Professor Stephen Williams was called to the scene. He examined the powder and made a statement that would define this investigation for decades. Red ochre is used in ancient Iranian burial rites, he told police with complete confidence. The implications hit like a bomb. This was not random. This was ritual. Someone with deep knowledge of Near Eastern archaeology had murdered Jane and performed an ancient burial rite over her body. The media exploded. Harvard student killed in ritual murder. Ancient death rite performed on archaeologist. Burial powder mystery baffles police. The red ochre dominated every headline, every news broadcast, every conversation across Cambridge. People were terrified. Police compiled a list of 100 people, anthropology students and faculty who had knowledge of Iranian burial customs, everyone who had been on the Iran expedition, everyone who had taken courses in Near Eastern archaeology. In February, there was a grand jury hearing. It was rushed because many were heading abroad for new digs. They needed to question everyone before they left. Every person from the Iran expedition was questioned. Professors, graduate students, undergraduates, Jane's classmates, her teachers, her friends. But there was a massive problem. Professor Lamberg Karlovsky, who led the Iran expedition, made his own statement. He called the red ochre theory completely fabricated and without foundation. There was no ancient Iranian burial rite that used red ochre that way. The police theory was based on a total misunderstanding of archaeology, but the investigation had already committed to this path. They continued questioning the Harvard anthropology department for weeks. They found absolutely nothing. No evidence, no motive, nothing to connect anyone to Jane's brutal murder. Meanwhile, there were other suspects to consider. James Humphrey, the boyfriend, he is always the first suspect. Police administered a polygraph test. James passed. His alibi was checked. He left Jane's apartment at 11:30. Multiple witnesses confirmed he was home by midnight. He was cleared. Donald and Jill Mitchell, the neighbors, they had access to Jane's apartment. They were the last to see her alive. Both took polygraph tests. Both passed. They had no motive. No evidence connected them to the crime. They were cleared. The Boston Strangler connection seemed promising. Beverly Simons was murdered in the same building in 1963. Albert DeSalvo confessed to her murder as part of his Boston Strangler confession. Could there be a second Boston Strangler? But DeSalvo was already locked up in a mental hospital by 1969. There was no evidence linking Jane's murder to the Strangler cases. The theory died quickly. The counterculture connection was investigated next. Jane knew odd people in Cambridge. People on drugs, hangers-on and acid heads. Could someone high on LSD have committed a ritualistic killing? Police dove into Cambridge's counterculture scene. They found nothing useful. Then exactly 1 month after Jane's murder, another woman was killed. February 6, 1969, her name was Ada Bean. She was 50 years old, a former Harvard research secretary, found dead in her apartment 1 mile from Jane's building. The details made everyone's blood run cold. She was face down on her bed, nightclothes pulled over her head, covered in blankets, raped and beaten to death. It was almost identical to Jane's murder. But there was one key difference. Ada's building had functional locks. Police would not confirm if the cases were linked, but speculation intensified. Was there a serial killer targeting Harvard-connected women? Despite all the theories and investigations and media attention, the case went completely cold. No murder weapon was ever found. The pointed stone was never recovered. Fingerprints collected from Jane's apartment did not match anyone in the system. All primary suspects had been cleared or were dead. The red ochre mystery led the investigation in the wrong direction for months. Valuable time was lost chasing a theory that was not even real. Witness memories faded. Media attention shifted. The technology of 1969 simply was not advanced enough. There was no DNA testing. Forensic capabilities were extremely limited. Chief James Reagan made a difficult decision. He restricted all information release. Too many media inaccuracies had compromised the investigation. The case files were sealed. The impact on the community was profound. Harvard filmed Jane's funeral on January 10th. Police watched the footage over and over, looking for suspicious behavior, looking for someone who did not belong. They found nothing. Students and faculty lived in constant fear. Women installed extra locks. Building security debates raged across campus. Jane's father worked at Radcliffe. The family was completely devastated. How do you go to work every day at the place where your daughter studied, where her killer might have studied, where he might still be walking around? The case became a Cambridge legend, a ghost story told in dorm rooms, a cautionary tale about broken locks and fire escapes. And somewhere Jane's killer walked free. The 1970s arrived, then the 1980s. Jane Britton's case remained officially open, but there was no active investigation. The Britton family tried to move forward. But how do you move forward when your daughter's killer is still out there? Jane's brother Boyd struggled deeply. He eventually became an Anglican priest. He later said his faith helped him survive the not knowing, the constant wondering, the questions that had no answers. J. Boyd and Ruth Britton, Jane's parents, left items around their home in Jane's memory. Her piano stayed in place. Her paintings hung on the walls. Photographs of Jane smiling, Jane on horseback, Jane at graduation. They could not bring themselves to pack away her life. The case was occasionally mentioned in local media. On the 5th anniversary, reporters wrote articles. Each time they would write about the Red Ochre mystery, the unsolved Harvard murder, the promising young archaeologist whose life was cut short. But there were never new leads. Then came the late 1980s. DNA testing became available to law enforcement. For the first time in history, investigators could use biological evidence to identify suspects with near certainty. It was revolutionary. It changed everything about solving crimes. The Cambridge police had carefully preserved evidence from Jane's apartment, including a semen sample collected during the autopsy. They submitted it for DNA testing. The result came back. No matches in the offender database. The killer's DNA was not in the system. In 2006, the case was retested with improved technology. DNA testing had advanced significantly. The results were more accurate and detailed. Still no matches at all? The evidence was carefully preserved. But there were no breakthroughs. By the early 2010s, a new generation discovered Jane's story online. Michael Widmer had covered Jane's murder as a reporter in 1969. Nearly 50 years later, he wanted to write about the case again. He requested case files. Becky Cooper was a staff writer at The New Yorker. She became fascinated with Jane's case. Eventually, she left the magazine to write a full book about Jane. She also requested the case files. Alyssa Barretto moderated the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit on Reddit. Online true crime communities were growing fast. Jane's case was discussed frequently. All three were denied access. The Cambridge police cited an ongoing investigation. They could not release information that might compromise the case. The writers received only old newspaper clippings and heavily redacted documents. The writers did not give up. In 2016 and 2017, they filed appeals with the Massachusetts Supervisor of Records. They argued that releasing information in other cold cases had actually generated fresh leads. Publicity helps solve crimes. People remember things. People come forward. Court hearings were scheduled. And that is when something unexpected happened. During preparation for the hearings, prosecutors reviewed all the evidence again. Every file, every piece of evidence, every test result, every theory from 1969 onward. Someone asked a simple question that changed everything. Can we do more with the DNA evidence? The media covered the case on major anniversaries. The 20th year, the 25th, the 40th anniversary. Each time there was a flurry of interest, then silence again. But the community never forgot. Cambridge made safety improvements in Jane's memory. Better lighting on streets, better locks on buildings, security systems installed. Changes that came too late for Jane but might save someone else. The building at 6 University Road was eventually renovated. It looked different now. But people who lived in Cambridge in 1969 never forgot what happened on the 4th floor. What no one knew was that Jane's killer had been living a parallel life all along, right under their noses. In 1967, a man named Michael Sumter worked on Arrow Street in Cambridge, less than 1 mile from Jane's apartment. In 1969, he had a girlfriend living in Cambridge. He visited her regularly. He knew the neighborhood well, the streets, the buildings. In 1972, Michael Sumter was convicted of assaulting a woman at Harvard Square subway station, just blocks from where Jane was murdered. In 1975, he was convicted of rape in Boston. While serving his sentence, he escaped from a work release program. While on the run, he committed a second rape. He was eventually recaptured and served his full sentence. His DNA was in the system from his rape convictions. It had been sitting there since the 1970s, but no one connected him to Jane's murder. No one tested his DNA against the evidence from 1969. There was no reason to suspect him. He was not on the suspect list. He had never been questioned about Jane. He had no known connection to Jane or Harvard. Later, his DNA would be linked to 2 other unsolved Cambridge rape murders from the early 1970s. What time is it where you are watching this right now? Somewhere, families are still waiting for answers, just like Jane's family waited for 49 years. Drop the time in your comments below. The year 2017 arrived. 48 years after Jane's murder, the legal battle over public records was moving forward. The Middlesex District Attorney's Office needed to review all the files. A team of investigators was assigned to the case. People who had not spent decades staring at the same evidence. Sometimes that is what you need. Someone who can see what everyone else missed. They examined everything with fresh eyes. Crime scene photos, witness statements, lab results, test results from the DNA testing done in the 1980s and again in 2006. And someone asked the question again, can we do more with the DNA evidence? The Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory was consulted. There was a new technology available, ISDR analysis. It focused on the Y chromosome, the chromosome that passes from father to son with almost no changes. It is different from regular DNA testing, more sensitive, better at processing degraded samples, and the samples from Jane's case were definitely degraded. They were 48 years old. The decision was made. Try the newest technology on the old samples. October 2017. The lab successfully extracted a male-specific DNA profile using YSTR analysis. For the first time in 48 years, they had a complete profile of Jane's killer. The profile was entered into CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system. Then they waited. July 2018, CODIS returned a result. A hit, a potential match to someone in the database. The name appeared on the screen. Michael Sumter. The investigators were absolutely stunned. They pulled his records immediately. Michael Sumter, convicted of rape in Boston in 1975, escaped from work release, committed a second rape, recaptured and served his full sentence. His DNA had been in the system since his 1975 conviction. The whole time, right there in the database for over 40 years. But there was a complication. ISTR analysis narrows the match to a male bloodline, but it cannot pinpoint a specific individual. It could be Michael Sumter. It could be his brother, his father, his son, any male relative who shares his Y chromosome. They needed to verify. The records mentioned Michael Sumter had a brother. The search began immediately. Where is Sumter's brother now? It is 2018. The murder was 1969. The brother would be in his 70s or 80s. Investigators used Ancestry.com and public records to locate him. They found him alive. They contacted him. They explained the situation carefully. The brother agreed to provide a DNA sample. The results came back. The match was close enough to eliminate 99.92% of the human male population. Statistical certainty. Michael Sumter killed Jane Britton. The investigators began pulling together everything they could find about Michael Sumter. Who was this man? In 1969, Michael Sumter was approximately 28 years old. He stood 5 feet 11 inches tall and weighed about 185 pounds. A witness had seen a tall man about 6 feet and 170 pounds running from Jane's building at 1:30 in the morning the night of the murder. The description matched Sumter perfectly. His connection to Cambridge went deep. He lived in Cambridge as a child in the 1950s. He attended first grade in Cambridge public schools. He was arrested as a juvenile by Cambridge police. He knew the city inside and out, the neighborhoods, the buildings, the shortcuts. In 1967, he worked on Arrow Street, only 1 mile from Jane's apartment. In 1969, he had a girlfriend living in Cambridge. He visited the area regularly. But here's the terrifying part. Jane and Michael Sumter had never met. They did not know each other. This was a complete stranger attack. Random violence. She never saw it coming. After murdering Jane, Sumter's criminal escalation continued like a nightmare that would not stop. In 1972, he assaulted a woman at Harvard Square subway station, just blocks from Jane's apartment. He was convicted. In 1975, he raped a woman in Boston. Convicted and sentenced to prison. During his prison sentence, he escaped from a work release program. While on the run, he raped another woman. He was recaptured and forced to serve his full sentence. DNA later linked him to 2 other Cambridge rape murders in the early 1970s, and to another unsolved rape. The full scope was absolutely horrifying. 5 rapes, 3 murders including Jane, and there might be others who were never linked to him. Police reconstructed exactly how Sumter murdered Jane that night. He climbed the fire escape to her 4th-floor apartment. The building had no security. The windows were accessible from the fire escape. Easy access for anyone willing to climb. A child in the building had heard unusual noises on the fire escape around the time of the murder. Nobody investigated those sounds. The toxicology report revealed something crucial about the timeline. Jane's blood alcohol level was 0%, but her stomach contained alcohol at 0.08%. The sherry had not been metabolized yet, which meant she was killed within minutes of returning home from the Mitchells' apartment. The timeline fit perfectly. Jane returned around 12:30 in the morning. The witness saw a man running from the building at 1:30. Jane was attacked in her sleep. She never had a chance to fight back properly. Sumter used a blunt object to crush her skull, possibly Jane's own Iranian stone souvenir. Then he fled down the fire escape. The witness description matched Sumter's height and weight exactly. Everything fit together. And then there was the red ochre mystery, the detail that had dominated the investigation for decades. The ancient burial rite theory, the Harvard insider theory, the ritualistic killing theory. 49 years of speculation about red ochre, 49 years of chasing the wrong theory. The truth was absurdly simple. Jane was a painter. Red ochre is a common pigment in oil paints. Jane painted animal pictures in her apartment. She had art supplies everywhere. The red ochre powder was already there. During the violent struggle, the powder was dispersed, scattered across the room, across Jane's body, across the walls and ceiling. It meant nothing at all. There was no ritual, no burial rite, no ancient ceremony. The entire Harvard connection theory was wrong from the start. It had led the investigation astray for decades. Wasted time, wasted resources. November 2018, 2 months before the 50th anniversary of Jane's murder, the Middlesex County District Attorney's Office called a press conference. District Attorney Marion T. Ryan stood at the podium. Cameras flashed everywhere. Reporters filled the room. Michael Sumter has been identified as the person responsible for the 1969 murder of Jane Britton, she announced. The room erupted with questions. I am confident that the mystery of who killed Jane Britton has finally been solved, and this case is officially closed. It was the oldest cold case Middlesex County had ever solved. The Harvard community was absolutely shocked. Alumni who remembered the case could not believe it was finally solved. Students who heard the story as a campus legend learned the truth. The true crime community celebrated online. This was what they worked for. Proof that cold cases can be solved, that justice can come even after decades. But District Attorney Ryan had more to announce. The DNA testing did not just identify Michael Sumter, it also ruled out other suspects. People who lived under a cloud of suspicion for 49 years were finally cleared. James Humphrey, Jane's boyfriend. He passed a polygraph test in 1969, but people still wondered. Now the DNA proved definitively he had nothing to do with Jane's murder. Donald and Jill Mitchell, the neighbors, the last people to see Jane alive. People whispered about them for decades. Now they were cleared beyond any doubt. Various anthropology department members who were questioned in 1969, all cleared completely. Today we are able to provide closure not just to Jane's family, but to those wrongly suspected, District Attorney Ryan said. Imagine living 49 years with people wondering if you got away with murder, having that suspicion follow you through your entire life, your career, your family, and then at 70 or 80 years old finally hearing these words, you are cleared. The DNA proves you are innocent, but there was a painful reality nobody could escape. Michael Sumter died in 2001. He could not be prosecuted. There would be no trial, no conviction, no sentence, no opportunity for Jane's family to confront him in court, no chance to ask why he did it, no possibility of him showing remorse or apologizing. The case was closed. The truth was known, but the killer was dead. Is that justice? Jane's brother Boyd Britton was now Reverend Boyd Britton, an Anglican church vicar living in Santa Barbara, California. He was the sole surviving member of the Britton family. His parents, J. Boyd and Ruth Britton, had died years earlier. They never knew who killed their daughter. They spent the rest of their lives wondering, hoping, waiting for a phone call that never came while they were alive. Boyd released a statement. A half-century of mystery and speculation has clouded the brutal crime that shattered Jane's promising young life and our family. He thanked State Police Sergeant Peter Sennett and all the investigators who worked the case over the decades. He acknowledged their dedication, their refusal to give up on Jane, but he also admitted something raw and honest. Learning to understand and forgive remains a challenge. How do you forgive someone who is dead? How do you find closure when you cannot confront the killer face to face? When you cannot hear an apology? When you cannot watch them be sentenced and punished? The answer is you do not always get closure, not the kind you want. Sometimes justice is just knowing the truth. Sometimes it is just being able to say these words. This is who did it. This is what happened. For Boyd Britton, it meant he could finally stop wondering if it was someone Jane knew, someone from Harvard, someone who was still walking around Cambridge. It was a stranger, a predator, a monster who saw an opportunity. 49 years. That is how long Jane Britton's family waited for answers. 49 years of wondering who took Jane's life that winter night. 49 years of living with questions that seemed like they would never be answered. 49 years of empty chairs at Thanksgiving dinner. Of birthdays that would never be celebrated. Of milestones Jane would never reach. Getting married. Having children. Making archaeological discoveries. 49 years of Boyd wondering if he would ever know what happened to his sister. Jane's parents never got their answers while alive. They died still wondering, still hoping. It was not the ending anyone wanted. Michael Sumter was dead. There would be no trial, no confrontation, no apology, no explanation of why he chose Jane. But it was something important. It was truth. It was certainty. It was the knowledge that Jane's killer had been identified. That his name would forever be attached to his crimes. That history would remember him not as an ordinary man, but as a serial killer who murdered at least 3 women. And 3 other families got answers too. The families of Sumter's other victims, women whose murders had gone unsolved for decades. They learned what happened to their loved ones. They learned who did it. They learned their loved ones had not been forgotten. This case proves something crucial about cold cases. Cold does not mean closed. Right now, somewhere in an evidence room, there is DNA waiting to be tested with technology that did not exist when the crime happened. Somewhere in a police file there is a case waiting for fresh eyes, for someone to ask the question, can we do more with this evidence? Somewhere a family is still waiting for the phone call that Jane's brother finally received in 2018. If this story impacted you, please hit the like button and share this video. Jane Britton deserves to be remembered not just as a murder victim, but as the brilliant young scholar she was. She was a whole person. A person with dreams and talents and plans for the future. Your engagement helps ensure victims like Jane are never forgotten. It keeps pressure on law enforcement to retest old evidence. It reminds families of cold case victims that people still care. It might even help solve a case. Someone watching this video might remember something important, might know something, might be inspired to push for testing in a case involving their own family. Subscribe and turn on notifications because I cover a new solved cold case every week. These stories matter. These families matter. Justice delayed is not justice denied. What cold case do you think deserves more attention? Drop it in the comments below. Your suggestions help me decide which stories to investigate next, which forgotten victims to bring back into the light, which families still waiting might be helped by renewed attention. For Jane, for her family, for every family still waiting out there. This is why we keep searching for truth. Thank you for watching.